This week on Supercars Talk, there's a new racetrack going to be built in Melbourne, and there's changes to Gen 3 already. The big news this week is that there's a new racetrack going to be built in Melbourne. Well, the state government has pledged $1.6 million into design and feasibility and all that kind of junk. We heard a lot about a Pakenham kind of racetrack a few years ago now. This one, they're talking about building out at Avalon. For those who don't know, it's about 50 minutes on a quiet Sunday afternoon. It's about 50 minutes from the Melbourne CBD or about 20 minutes from Geelong. Not sure exactly where in Avalon they're going to build it, but there was the air show there a few weeks ago. They had a reasonably large crowd there. We're not talking Grand Prix levels, but probably somewhat levels that you would see at a normal kind of supercars round, and there was hours and hours of queuing. They weren't quite expecting those crowds. Maybe, I'm just saying this because it would definitely need a lot of infrastructure to be put in place before we could really look at something like this. As you head out there, public transport, which one big thing for Sandown is that there is a train line right next door. Albert Park, you are in the middle of the city essentially, so public transport and that, not an issue with those. So you do get some of the crowd using public transport, some using their own cars and that. Realistically, for Avalon, it will all be going in on cars. There is a train line out there, but it is a V-line, which that's a regional line. Werribee, which is about kind of half the distance from Melbourne to there, is the last of the metro line. So, I mean, it would need a lot of planning on that end, I think, for this to be a really viable solution. Possibly even, you know, shuttles from, say, the city or Werribee or something like that. Shuttle buses running in and out to take people. But yeah, that kind of stuff poses its own problems. But a little bit about the track, they're talking about FIA grade 1, so that means they could host Formula 1 there. But that's not what they're aiming for. They're very happy with Albert Park hosting the Australian Grand Prix, apparently. So to me, realistically, if you are, they're talking about potential MotoGP, Formula E, maybe even some sports car racing, which I think all only need a grade 2 license. I don't think MotoGP needs that grade 1. So why go to all the trouble, hassle, and boring track designness that we would need for a grade 1 license? Yeah, I think aim for that kind of grade 2. Like, let's not build it crappy, but all the extra safety stuff, if you're not looking at hosting Formula 1 there, why kind of go to that trouble to get all of that if, you know, the main draw card each year does not need that if you are going to go, say, for that MotoGP. Obviously, the Supercars only needs a grade 3, I think it is. So, which that really, the Supercars will be the main draw. The 90% or 99% of the year, this is going to be used as a driver training, track days, things like that. You do not need that super high grading for all of that. You know, Winton gets along just fine. So what I'd prefer is them to aim a little bit lower, but have the main track, say. What my idea would be that you essentially have a main track and then an extension of that main track that also forms a secondary track as well. So on your driver training days and that, track days, you can have a little bit of a shorter track and a big long track. We do not need, you know, like your super GT kind of the bend that, you know, 7.77 kilometers of, yeah, getting lost kind of thing. I'd prefer to see something that the main track being around that kind of 3 kilometer length, that kind of, you know, Sandown-ish kind of length. Funnily enough, the track that is essentially probably going to be replacing. But something around that kind of three, maybe pushing towards a 4 kilometre, bit shorter, supercars type of circuit, bit like your Oran Parks or your Lakesides, things like that were quite spectacular. Just a really good track for racing for our category, which is going to be the main thing that's on there. And then having that extension kind of track, maybe that is a 2 kilometre somehow, and then when they combine the forces of the two together, it becomes, say, your 6.5k track that would be quite good for, say, a MotoGP, or even like a endurance kind of a GT3 category or something. Possibly have a piggyback round with Bathurst 12 hour or something like that, where a couple of you have a couple of big GT3 rounds come down, and you have that opportunity. Could even do something with the Bend, even try and have a bit of a series over summer of those kind of cars here. That would excite a lot of people. But yeah, have it so that the primary kind of track is a better kind of designed supercars track, rather than having one of these, like the racing was a lot better at Albert Park with Gen 3, but it's yet to be seen what, say, the Bend is going to be like. Generally, that hasn't been the best racetrack for supercars. I'd prefer to see something designed that was a bit better for supercars, because that's going to be the main draw, and that's where you're really going to get the fans in, and get it to be a successful project. But it's not being built yet. It is a feasibility study. We have heard of things like this before, but it's probably not in a too bad location, because you're not going to get a lot of neighbours kind of coming in to that area, I suppose, and you're not that far out of Melbourne, and you are close to a big population in Geelong. People can travel kind of down from it as well. It is somewhat accessible, as long as they do get that traffic stuff right, because there isn't great options with the public transport there. But down in the comments, let me know, am I talking a heap of crap? And do you guys want to see, a massive, something bigger than the Bend, or do you like my idea of having a bit smaller supercars kind of focused track, and then them having extensions for it if we do have those international categories coming in? Now, on a little bit of supercars news. It's come out this week. They are going to allow some strengthening on the Gen 3 chassis after they've kind of folded in on themselves on smallish impacts at the first couple of rounds, which we saw Courtney's car that he had the accident in the top 10 shootout at Newcastle. He didn't get back out on track. Considerable damage also to Declan Fraser's car off that start line incident there. Then we had Shane Van Gisbergen missed a practice session at Albert Park due to that spin, which that was it was very spectacular high-speed spin in that, but what seemed like a very light tap against the wall did make him sit out a practice session. And then we had the fires with all those repairs on them, but the Jack LeBrock incident as well, that there was a lot of that car replaced over what wasn't the biggest hit to it was decent, but we've definitely seen bigger hits in the past. Tim Slade missed a session. I think he missed qualifying as well at Albert Park over the damage. So it is optional if they do add in this extra strengthening or not. So I'd imagine the teams 888 are not going to be doing any extra strengthening because they've got all the money in the world. And I think you probably see the guys, Tickford, Brad Jones, MSR, kind of the guys with lower budgets and a tradition, I suppose, of damaging cars will probably be the ones that take on these extra works to save them money in the long run of having to fork out a lot of time and labour and cost of rebuilding these components. Of course, you're still going to damage your car in a crash, but this should strengthen it up a bit more so you don't have to replace everything if you have a little knock. Now, also, they are talking about trying to reduce some of the costs of the Gen 3 cars. We've had price rises and whatnot, but somehow this was allowed to get out of control. I don't know. You need a top-down, like a Tony Cochran kind of had to come in and go, this is ridiculous. Why are we doing this like this? Stupid. As I walked around, like I got to have a close look at a few of the cars at Albert Park. Absolute masterpieces. Like, they are beautiful pieces of kit. But there's so much carbon fiber on the cars. Like, it looks absolutely beautiful, but as I said, what happens in an accident with that? Basically, it blows up. Whereas fiberglass panels on them, they crinkle and bend, you can patch them up and things like that. The carbon fiber bits basically straight in the bin. So why didn't we use fiberglass on those parts? And yeah, the clips, the front clips and that, absolutely beautiful looking, but they just looked quite flimsy. Like, yeah, you could push against the car and kind of bend things, which I understand there's supposed to be kind of a crumble zone in that, but it was like an engineer designed them without any input about what it was going to cost when, you know, we were trying to save cost out of these cars. Now, I understand, like, building the first ones of all this, it's going to cost a heap more. You've got no carryover stuff, that there will be economies of scale and all that as we go along. But I think that there was some low-hanging fruit where you could have pulled some costs out of these, like, straight away, that would not have affected anything at all. I'm not sure with the Ford, like, because they do have the heavier engine, but, you know, the stupid thing with the Camaros, they've got all this carbon fiber everywhere, and then they have to add in 60 kilos of ballast because of the engine. The engine's a lot lighter. Now, I'm not sure if the Ford is also running the same amount of carbon fiber. I didn't get quite as good a look, close look at the Fords, like with everything open, but I'd imagine they've got the same. But we're probably talking a few kilos saved with, you know, carbon fiber versus fiberglass, and that, to me, that is just a very simple one, because things like the front bumpers and that, you're going to destroy them during the year, and yeah, rather than kind of fixing and repairing bits, you're just going to be throwing them in the bin, and it would be quite, some of the figures I heard being thrown around about what front bar costs. Yeah, it's a little bit scary when you think they're not going to be so repairable and usable again. So anyway, that's it for this week. Down in the comments, let me know what you think about what direction they should take for the new track in Melbourne. And yeah, fingers crossed this actually happens, because we're kind of... It's hard. Phillip Island's obviously not working as a Supercars thing. They've shunned Winton this year. If Sandown goes, we could just be left with Albert Park on the calendar, which, yeah, from where we were as, you know, as a Melbourne fan of the sport a few years ago, we were flush with events to go to. And yeah, now we're staring down the barrel of, and do we really want to go to the Grand Prix? So yeah, another option would be a really exciting thing. But until next time, I'm still Dave, and I'll catch you later.